So I thought we'd start off just by having each member of the panel just say their name, say what they thought they were going to might be doing when they graduated from college, and just say what their title is, what they're doing now, and then we'll come back and move from there. So let's start off with Anthony Bianchi.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Anthony Bianchi. When I graduated NYU from NYU Film School. So I was going to be the next Marty Scorsese or Kurosawa. Somehow that didn't quite work out. But anyway, that's where I was. Yeah, when I graduated NYU, New York University, I went to NYU Graduate School. New York unemployment.
And what's your current position?
Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot. Yeah, I'm currently a city council member in a small city called Inuyama in Aichi Prefecture.
Yeah.
You know Inuyama?
In a high school homestay there.
Oh, cool, man. Inuyama's in the house. All right. Cool. You got to tell me about it later. Okay.
Oh, yeah, let's do it. Let's fast go. Okay, next is Laurel.
I'm Laurel Lukaszewski, and I guess on my JET application, I told them that I was going to go for my MBA when I get back. That didn't exactly happen, but I did get my MA when I came back. So, and now I'm a full-time artist. So we'll see. It worked out really well.
And I'm Jim Gannon. I thought I was going to Africa. It's not that I'm bad with geography. I was fascinated with Africa, and I had a choice when I graduated between an internship that was supposed to turn into a job in Somalia, of all places, and going to Japan. And it came down to, at the time I graduated school, I didn't have 2 dimes to rub together. So I said, I'll take this job and I'll fly over to Japan. 1 year, then I'm going to go over to Africa and work there, and I wanted to work on development. And I only made it last year, which is about 18 years later. And I work right now at the Japan Center for International Exchange. I'm the executive director of their U.S. operations.
So what happened? How did you go from Africa to executive director?
The short story is nepotism. The long story is I got back from Japan and I came back. I'm from New York, or actually from New Jersey originally, and I was coming back with my girlfriend, long-term girlfriend, set up a house there, and I got back the day I got back, I got dumped, and the house fell through.
Oh, this is sad.
And then I went out to go look for a job, and I was going around to these Japanese temp agencies, and I said I was in Japan, I was in a JET program for 2 years, it was a great experience, and I stayed on a year, I went to grad school in Japan. Then I was doing a business teaching on the side there, and I supported myself in grad school. And hey, by the way, the geek part came out, and I said, I even wrote a thesis while I was there. You want to see it? And the guy turns, says, okay, so I can mark off no work experience. So I went to San Francisco for a year, and I sort of got into trouble. And then I came back. I went to grad school for international affairs. I worked for 2 years with the Japanese government, and then it was...
Where did you go to grad school?
Columbia.
SIPA?
Yeah, to SIPA, School of International Public Affairs in Columbia.
Was there anybody else in this room that you went to grad school with?
Where's Matthew? So after that, my professor introduced me to this job, but it was also, my wife had worked for the founder and the current head of the organization. She had worked there 7 or 8 years earlier, and so she was sort of his adopted American daughter. So I recommend that to anybody.
Okay, let's go to Laurel. So you graduated from college. You were thinking of getting an MBA, and now you're a sculpture artist. Mm-hmm. What happened in between?
I'll try to make this brief. I was in Japan, of course, on JET, and the whole time I was in college before JET, I also was doing the whole international affairs art, and then the whole, get a real job from my parents on the other end of the phone usually came through. So,
where were you on JET?
I was on Tamagashima, which is the southern, if you look at the map, Japan, Kyushu, there's a long skinny island right south of Kyushu. I was on the southern end of that.
Wow.
So, it's beautiful. I actually have pictures of it if we have time. Anyway, but I got back and had gotten accepted to graduate school of the Asian Studies program at Florida State. And in the winter time, so I took all art classes in the fall when I got back, and then I jumped into that because I still felt like I needed to have a real job. But no one told me that getting a degree in Asian Studies doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to get a real job. So I ended up in Seattle working for the Japan America Society out in Seattle for 3 years. And then I actually met a JET at a conference in Las Vegas. We were skipping the meetings and sitting out by the pool. Jets I want to do, and it was probably one of the best career moves I've ever made, because then she called me a couple months later and said, there's an opening here in Washington, DC, and do you want to come work in DC? And I said, absolutely. So came to DC and worked for the Japan America Society here, worked my way up to executive director, and there's not much you can do after that. And so I decided that I was going to give it all up for the lucrative world of being a full-time artist.
But you were the executive director of Japan America Society here in DC.
Yes.
And what kind of art do you do?
I do sculpture. I work mostly with clay. And so I do a lot of installations. I do some large corporate work, and then I do a lot of just personal things for collectors.
You do things in people's homes?
Yeah. Yep.
In any room?
I know where you're going with this.
What is the most interesting room that you might have ever done?
I would say it is the bathroom. Because clay, of course, you can't put photography in a bathroom because it's too humid, and clay works really, really well. And so one of the best bathrooms I ever put a sculpture in was probably larger than my apartment.
Wow. And then was there a sakura, a cherry blossom?
Yeah, I do. I have an installation that I've done both in Washington, DC and Norfolk, Virginia. And it's a very large installation of cherry blossoms. I'm also on the National Cherry Blossom Festival board. And next year is the 100th anniversary of the Gift of Trees. And so I'm working very hard on that. And it sort of infiltrates into my artwork. And so I have this installation of 3,020 cherry blossoms, one for each of the trees, that was given to Washington, DC. And when you see all of these blossoms and you realize that each one represents a full tree, it's really sort of astounding. It's an amazing number of trees. It's just an incredible gift. And so, yeah, that's
okay. Let's move on to Anthony. So you were looking to go to film school, and now you're a Japanese politician.
Doesn't that make perfect sense? Actually, yeah, I did go to film school. I'm old, so I'll try and condense this as much as possible. I went to film school, went out to LA, I'm in Hollywood, clawed my way to the bottom. I was working. Yeah, it was tough. I was working as a production assistant, the last position I had on a television show called The Jeffersons. And I was lucky enough to be on the last 3 seasons, and it got canceled. So I was out of work again and tried to get back into NYU, New York, unemployment. No, I went back to New York, was working for the city, being a tiny kid from Brooklyn, I had a little bit too much olive oil pumping through the veins. So I was interested in Asian culture because I felt I needed to calm myself a little bit. And while I was working for the city, one day I was reading the newspaper, and there was like an expo in Gifu Prefecture, the Gifu Mirai happening in 1988. So I said, this is the first time I ever heard of a homestay. So I said, this is interesting. I'll go to Japan. I stayed with a family. Had such a great time. I thought that I'd like to live in Japan for a year or so. They told me about the JET program. Came back to New York, applied. Following year, I was on JET for 2 years. 1 year became 2, 2 years became 4. I was working for one of the cities that I visited after I finished my contract with JET. Make a long story short, a lot of years passed by, and I was working for the city government in Inuyama City. And I started a program based on my experience with JET, where they were hiring, they had those rent what are they now, ALPs? ELPs? So they were using one of those companies and said, hey, let me get you teachers with, who can teach, so we started a program there. And that started me banging my head against the administration all the time, and I would talk to the mayor a lot and talk to council people a lot. And actually I thought, well, it's because we're foreigners that we don't fit in anywhere, or our program is not an official Mama Show program, so we don't fit in anywhere. But then I would talk to average citizens. I go to the gym and in the sauna, and everybody would say the same thing. Whenever you deal with the administration, you run into these walls. Oh, and it's not because we're foreigners. So, and it's not because it's not an official program. The average citizen, between the average citizen and the administration, the government, there's a wall, and I felt like it had to be knocked down. And being a tiny kid from Brooklyn with the olive oil flowing through my veins there, I said, I'm gonna do it, you know. And instead of complaining, which I did for a number of years, I'm gonna stop complaining and either do something else and run for office. And I hate to quit. So if I run and I don't get elected, that's fine too. I didn't quit. The people don't want me to do it, you know. And I ran and somehow I got elected. And there you go. That's the name of it.
Two follow-up questions. What are the big issues in Inuyama these days?
Oh, paying for garbage bags.
Yeah.
And we have, well, actually one of the big problems we do have is we need to build a new garbage treatment facility. And the way they're doing it now, they're trying to get a bunch of municipalities together to do it. And just the area they're going to build it, they pick, of all the possible areas, of course they pick the absolute worst area. You know, I mean, let's cut down another mountain, cut another mountain in half and build a garbage treatment facility. And it also happens that there's a company that, the SISEC, what do you call it? I don't know how to say it in English. I forgot English. That's another reason I went to Japan. I'm from Brooklyn. I was never going to be good at English. So I figured I should learn one language as well. Anyway, that's another problem. But, so it's a little bit, you know, there's a little bit something fugazi going on that the city wants to buy this particular land off of this one company for an outrageous price. So that's a big problem, and a lot of public works and the things that the new mayor is trying to put in, which will really kind of bankrupt the city and whatnot. And especially now after 3/11, this isn't the time where we should be building extravagant things and petitioning the government for all this kind of, you know, all these funds to build things that aren't really absolutely necessary until things in the Tohoku area are a little bit more stabilized, you know. So those are some of the big issues. Unfortunately, not so many other council people seem to agree with me. So I'll say that, and instead of people like, this is nice, people react. When I say this stuff in council meetings in Japan, it's like, it was worse than my junior high school classroom. Anyway, I don't get no respect. When we start doing Dangerfield, we'll be in trouble.
Let's go back to Jim. Jim, what's the, you had a big year, but you've been doing this for a while. What's the best